for one, also don't like biohacking much. I like ancestral hacking, right? So it's like, I don't like all these gadgets and this and stuff. It's like, let's just mimic what we humans need.
Yeah, we're totally aligned on that,
right?
man. That's
Yeah,
what I'm like 90% of all health problems can be solved by approximating the conditions that you evolved in.
Yeah.
Like we evolved to be on this planet, and then we just sort of at one point decided we were so smart that we were done with the planet. Like we got it from here, right?
Yeah.
Like we're gonna live in buildings, we're gonna have air conditioning, we're gonna have heating, we're gonna have artificial lighting. We're not gonna walk anywhere anymore because we got cars, we got bicycles, we got motorcycles. We're gonna grow our own food in places where this doesn't grow. We're going to mash up foods, put in other chemicals, do all sorts of things, make stuff out of grain, and we're going to eat this food that was never even available to us. Like ancestrally, we would have never been exposed to it or even components of it. It's completely artificial stuff. And and now we're going to have these little dopamine machines on our hands that cause, stress and, alert all the time with our phones ringing or texting or social media, all this other stuff. And we've so far removed ourselves from the way we evolved. There's no way we're getting the best performance out of this machine. Whether or not you're going to live as long, like maybe the modern medicine and other things, and especially like emergent, okay, so maybe you're going to survive longer, but do you want more years of life, or do you want more life in your years, right? It's like, do you want, like me personally, I'd rather die at 70, but be like strong and capable when I die instead of like corroding away at 90. And I think most people feel that way. So yeah, I mean, I think most Neolithic disease has to do with us just saying we don't need the environment that we grew up there, that we evolved in. We don't need to sleep when the sun's down. We don't need to eat whole foods. Like I can choose to not eat a major component of my diet, right? Because like my ancestors all ate meat. I guarantee you they all ate meat. I can't just choose to not eat meat and expect to have the health that, I mean, my ancestors formed this body, right? They encoded everything this body does through, millennia. I don't get to just choose to not do that because I think I got some supplement that somebody made in his garage a couple of years ago.
Human.
Les humains à leur meilleur.
Hormonal.
C'est tu apogeo.
Peak Ningen.
O melhor humano.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Peak Human podcast. Unless this is your first time, then I should tell you a little bit more. I'm Brian Sanders. I'm the creator of the Food Lies film that's shaping up so nicely, so excited. I can't wait to get it out to the world. We're still a ways off. It's a slow process, but you can check it out at foodlies.org. You can check out a bunch of videos on the Food Lies YouTube. You can follow me on any social media platform. If you search for Food Lies, I've dedicated my life to understand nutrition and give people an unbiased look at it, help them understand it better, make things simple, interview the best people around the world, the best doctors, scientists, ranchers, anyone involved in the process, create great content, make things simple, provide value, and not get caught up in dietary dogma. I also have my business nosetotale.org, which helps support this podcast and makes it all possible. I've connected with top quality ranches here in Texas and bring the best meats to you, straight to your door. You can make your own box. We have free shipping. It's not shipped in from New Zealand or Australia or wherever it is like the other guys. We use the whole animal. We have the organ meats. We have the bones. We have the marrow. We have it all. That's nosetotale.org. That's about me. Now I should talk about Dr. Kirk Parsley, my new pal, my Austin friend. We actually did an in-person podcast for once. It was really great to do it in person. It's a rare treat these days. So catch this one on YouTube. Dr. Kirk Parsley served as an Undersea Medical Officer at Naval Special Warfare Group 1 from June 2009 to January 2013. While there, he led the development and supervised the group's first Sports Medicine Rehabilitation Center. He's a former SEAL and received his medical degree from Bethesda Uniformed Services University of Health and Sciences in 2004. Doc Parsley has been a member of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine since 2006 and has served as a Naval Special Warfare's expert on sleep medicine. In addition, he is certified in hormonal modulation, age management medicine. After leaving the Navy, he went into concierge medicine and consulting. He continues to consult for multiple corporations and professional athletes/teams. Doc Parsley lectures worldwide on sleep, wellness, and hormonal optimization. This is a great one. I've never dedicated a whole episode to sleep. It's so important. We talk about if it is the foundation of health. Is it food? Is it sleep? Is it both? Do they work hand in hand? You'll find out. Stick with this one. There's some great stories he tells, but also some great info. Just an interesting guy. He weaves in some great actionable tips. So the only other thing I need to mention is sapien.org. You can join the tribe there. You can connect with myself and Dr. Gary one-on-one. We do Zoom calls, messaging, a whole private site, basically. Get the extended show notes there of this podcast. Get discounts at nosetotale.org. All kinds of good stuff. Also the program at sapien.org if you want to lose weight, reverse disease. We've got the info. We've got the coaching. We got your back. Basically, it's about accountability. We're there for you. If you need a helping hand, we'll help keep you in line. Check it out, sapien.org. And now, let's get on to the show with Doc Parsley. Hey everyone, we're live with Dr. Kirk Parsley. He's in studio for once. We're here in Austin. We just realized we live next to each other. We almost did one remotely yesterday, but that would have been dumb. So he's here now. How's it going?
Going great, man. Fought the traffic to get here. Actually, it wasn't that bad. I thought it was going to be terrible, but
well, it's Friday traffic in Austin's nothing like LA, where I came from.
Well, that's very true. That's very true. It's, there's always something worse you could compare yourself to, I guess. So.
And you have a San Diego number? Are you from?
I was in San Diego for the military took me out to San Diego, so that's where I did SEAL training, and then I was a SEAL there, and then when I went, and when I was a doctor, I was just a doctor in San Diego for the Navy as well.
Well, let's get into that. You're a SEAL doctor.
Yeah. Right. So, so I, ironically, I was a terrible student my whole life, like didn't care about school whatsoever. Got terrible grades, thought I was dumb. But I was always into sports and competition. So I started reading like nutrition books and started working out at like 10 years old and just ridiculous stuff. And just wanted to be like the biggest, fastest, strongest, most athletic guy in the world. But didn't care at all about school. So played sports. I did well enough in school to play sports. Like during the football season, I had, I'd get my C's, and then as soon as football season's over, D's, F's, like whatever. So ended up dropping out of high school. I did 4 years of high school. I was still a sophomore by credits. There was this there was this television documentary show called 48 Hours back then. It's like 60 minutes. And they'd covered 48 hours of SEAL training. And it was the toughest training in the world. And I was like, well, I want to go do the toughest training in the world. So I did that. I got my GED, joined the Navy, went to SEAL training, made it through, obviously. Spent some time as a SEAL. It's pre 9/11, so I'm not like the guys with the grizzly beards and the pack, kid all over them. And like, I'm not that kind of SEAL. We're called the Hollywood SEALs because, we were just jumping out of planes and rock climbing and stuff and like, pre-combat times. We worked in Southeast Asia. We worked with other countries, trained their special forces, did some work with them, maybe their police forces, did stuff like that. It was pretty redundant because all you really did was train and deploy and train and deploy and train. And after doing that 3 times, like doing all the same training trips, deploying to the same place, doing the same work, I'm like, maybe I'll go do something else, I was dating a woman who was getting her master's in physical therapy. And I was reading her textbooks when I was on deployment because it's the kind of stuff I was interested in. And I thought, well, maybe I could be a physical therapist. And so I got out of the Navy, started junior college. You have to have 2,000 volunteer hours to be just to apply to physical therapy school. And so I started doing my volunteer hours. They hired me like the second week I was there, I think, maybe even the first week. And so I worked as a PT aide, which would be the same volunteer hours, that would count for volunteer hours. And so I worked there the whole time I was in college. And I don't know if I said San Diego Sports Medicine Center. And it's like this healthcare mecca there. So we had DOs and MDs, orthopedic surgeons, sports med, family practice guys. We had acupuncturists, we had podiatrists, we had massage therapists, athletic trainers, all of it. And I pretty quickly decided I didn't want to be a physical therapist, but didn't really know what else I wanted to do. So I hung around all these people and kind of bonded with the doctors, and they were like, "Hey, you should go to medical school." Like, slow down, like pump the brakes, kiddo. Like, I didn't even graduate high school. Let's be realistic here. And the head doctor comes out as a guy named Lee Rice. He has a clinic in Point Loma still. And he comes out and he says, "Kirk, the question isn't, could you get into medical school? The question is, would you go if you got in?" I was like, "Of course I'd go if I got in." He's like, "Well, there you have it." So kind of, shamed me into doing it. And back in my day, you had to, it was pre internet. So you had to go to the bookstore and get out the Kaplan review book and see what schools you were competitive for, right? Based on your grade and GPA. So it was at that time that I found out that the military had their own medical school. I had no idea. And then, I was already married. I already had a kid. They were going to pay me to go to medical school instead of the other way around. I was going to be able to support my family while I went to medical school. So like, no brainer. I figured the military was a closed chapter in my life, but it got reopened, obviously. And the way the Navy works, they'll train you to do, like, if you're qualified and a candidate they want, they'll train you to do anything, and you pay them back with time. So 4 years of medical school, you have to be a doctor for them for 8 years. That's how you pay it back. So it ends up being 12 years in the military because you're in the military while you're in medical school. But come out debt free, like I said, be able to support my family, all that. So it made sense. I figured I'd get back to the SEAL teams as their doctor, be able to go back to the community, and, give something back. I was really well steeped in sports medicine and orthopedics. So I'm like, I'll be great for the SEAL teams. And then I went back to the SEAL teams, and this really opportune time, like anything in the military, anything in the government, they say they want to do something, and then it takes 10 years to get the funding to actually do it. So I got there at a time when they'd actually just gotten the funding to build our very first sports medicine facility of our own, like our very first rehab facility. And so I had obviously a great pedigree for that. So they put me in charge of that. So I was supervising the build out. I worked with a lot of other staff there, a lot of the other leadership there, and we hired our first strength and conditioning coach and our first nutritionist and our, first athletic trainer, and like the first of everything we'd ever had. And people would have assumed SEALs had all this treatment like a professional sports team or something. No, nothing. So, and we hired great people. Like, we got people from professional sports teams, from the Olympic Training Center, from like really competitive high-end schools. And then I was the dumbest guy around, because I brought in all these specialists. And in the military, when you're the dumbest guy, what they do is they say, "Well, you're in charge now. Like, you're going to supervise, you're going to lead everybody." And so they put me in this office to supervise and lead this clinic. And you have to know something about the SEALs is they don't, the worst thing you can do to a SEAL is put them on the bench, right? Like, you could take money away, demote them, punish them, call them names, whatever, no big deal. But taking them away from their job, like, that's the worst thing you can do to them. So healthcare providers can take them away from, one of the few people who can take them out of their jobs. So usually when they see healthcare providers, they just lie because they don't want a chance, so they, like, if they think that what they're dealing with is bad enough that might disqualify them, they just won't tell you, which is terrible, because then you don't have a chance to help them. They don't get a chance to get help. But because I was a SEAL, and I'd been a SEAL there recently enough to where there were still a lot of SEALs around that I had been a SEAL with. So people knew my reputation, like me as a person, as opposed to just some other dude who was a SEAL. And so started slowly. Guys would come in my office and say, shut the door and be like, "Hey man, let me tell you what's really going on with me." And they had this litany of symptoms, man. It's like, I can't concentrate. I walk in a room 5 times to pick something up because I don't remember why I got in there. I leave. I can't remember. I come back in. Every guy I talked to left their house an average of 3 times in the morning to get in their car, start pulling. I forgot my wallet. get 3 times just to get out of the driveway every single
Younger
day.
guys.
Yeah. They're younger guys. I mean, you're talking about guys, and these are guys in like their early 30s, maybe late 20s, some of them. And they're like, my motivation sucks. I'm super moody. I snap at my kids. I snap at my wife. My sex drive's low. I'm eating perfectly, working out perfectly, like exactly how our nutritionists and strength and conditioning coaches are training me to do. I'm doing exactly what they say, and I'm getting fatter. I'm getting weaker. I'm losing muscle.
How's their blood work look?
Well, so here, so there's the rub. They told me all these symptoms, and nothing that they were saying met disease, right? It was like, okay, these are all symptoms. Let me test it. I didn't know what I was looking for, honestly, right? I'm a Western trained medical, like I'm an MD. If you don't have a disease, I don't know what to do with you, right? Because that's all I'm trained on. Like, this is a disease. This is how you treat the disease. That's it. That's all we know how to do. And so, these guys were performing suboptimally, but that's by their standards. You compare them to the general population, and the medical world's like, these guys are great. Like, they're super performers, but by their standards, they're doing terrible. And so I didn't know, like, I thought this must be what they called, shell shock and the first, World War II and combat fatigue in Vietnam. Like I didn't know what that was, but this must be that kind of syndrome is what I thought. And fortunately, because I was a doctor for the SEAL teams, and this was 2009 when I got there. So they had already killed bin Laden, and, they had like the celebrity status. And so I could call people up. I could watch somebody's TED talk, or I could go to a symposium, see a guy lecture, or read somebody's book, and I could just call them and say, hey,
I'm a SEAL doctor.
Yeah. I was like, this is Lieutenant Commander Kirk Parsley. I'm a doctor for the West Coast SEALs. And I watched your TED talk, and I was wondering if I could run patients by, if I could train with you over Zoom, or we didn't have Zoom, but whatever. If I could come train in your clinic, can I come proctor? And like, some guys would bring me into the clinic for 3 or 4 days, see patients with them, but everybody was generous. Every single person I talked to said yes. And so I got to learn a lot really quickly. Kind of the first thing I was looking at, kind of skipped a bit. When I had no idea what to do, I just tested everything I could imagine testing. I just so these guys were going and getting 17 vials of blood drawn, 98 different lab markers. I'm just looking for a pattern. And predictably now, but back then I didn't know, but predictably now, all their anabolic markers were really low. Testosterone was low, DHT was low, IGF-1 was low, DHEA was low, thyroid was low, everything inflammatory, catabolic was high. And, being a doctor, I wanted to fix it, but they didn't have disease. They were still within these huge reference ranges, right? Testosterone's 250 to 1100. And I see a 28-year-old guy who has a testosterone of 256, and they're like, good to go. Like I'm like, that's not good to go. That's okay. Like, that reference range comes from the Framingham study, right? Framingham heart study, where they just studied a town of people that hardly anybody moved in, hardly anyone moved out. And they just collected data for 30 years. And when they tested for testosterone, there were 3 criteria. You had to be 19 or older, you had to have your testicles, and you had to be alive. And if you met those 3, you were normal. Yeah. And so 250 was probably the 85-year-old guy in the nursing home, right? Yeah. Who did nothing. And 1100 was probably the 19-year-old, right? Like, just makes sense knowing what we know about medicine. But it doesn't matter to endocrinologists, because they're only treating disease. And if I would send guys over there and go, dude has a total testosterone of 238. And then the endocrinologist would be, well, he took the test at 9:07 and you really need this test before 9. So let me retest him, and I'll test him at 8 in the morning and go, oh, he's 252, normal. And I'm like, frustrated as all get out. And then so the way the SEAL teams are a total word of mouth community, because they don't trust anybody. It's built into the culture. And so if one guy has success, they tell their buddy about it. And it's like, oh, I went and talked to Doc Parsley and it was great. And he sent a couple of buddies over, and then the exponential growth. So probably a month into this, I've had 100 guys come to my office and tell me the exact same story. I thought they were like coaching each other. I'm like, this is so similar. And about the 100th guy, I'm sitting there taking notes, asking him questions, and he says something about taking Ambien every night. And I was like, seems like a lot of guys take Ambien. Like, I just make a note in the margin, go on with the interview. He leaves, and then I start going back through my files. Every single guy who had been in my office was taking Ambien. And I was like, maybe Ambien causes this, right? Maybe Ambien causes these side effects. And so I went went to medical school, took my pharmacology class. I knew the mechanism of action of Ambien. So it works like GABA in the brain, right? It's a GABA analog. But I didn't really know what GABA does in the brain, during sleep. Like, okay, well, what is that? So then I had to learn a lot about the physiology of sleep to even know how GABA is actually working and to know what would happen.
Make sure it's good.
The camera's so good.
Yeah, no,
and to know what would happen if guys.
actually, maybe I will check it.
Okay.
Just to make sure while we did that pause. Yeah. Check the right mic too.
Yeah. So after learning a lot about the sleep physiology, what actually is going on, what Ambien is actually doing, then I have enough information to say, okay, well, taking sleep drugs changes your sleep architecture this way, like the relative ratios of your deep sleep and REM sleep and how long you're cycling through, like that changes when you take any drug. And now I know enough about sleep to know, well, what's the likely consequence of that change? And once I knew that explained everything. Like, no, it didn't explain everything, but it could explain everything, right? And I said, this could literally account for every single symptom that every guy's coming in and talk to me about would be this distorted sleep architecture. And I made my case, and it literally got laughed out of so many offices of the leadership. I'd be like, no, this is what I think is happening. And I'd be telling them, these are SEAL officers. They're not doctors. Yeah. And they're like, you're telling me that the guy's hormones are low because they're not sleeping enough. I'm like, yeah.
Well, this is back then. Yeah, we didn't know enough about sleep back then.
Yeah. And he's like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Or they would literally laugh. There'd be four of them in the room. They'd go, okay, doc, right. Yeah. So I'm going to go sleep lots and be a bodybuilder. And I'm like, and then eventually they started letting me lecture on it. We had these big symposiums, like these pre and post retreats. So before a SEAL team, before they deployed, we'd take them out to a resort, take them out there with their families. And we'd, prepare them for, you're about to be away from your family for 6 to 9 months. And the wives are going to experience this, and the kids are going to experience this, and the dad's going to experience this. And there's going to be communication issues. And here's this resource for that. And here's this. And so you prep them. And obviously a lot of people there have already deployed before, but a significant portion, this is their first deployment. So it's, it's to orient everybody to the pressures and trials and tribulations of having a deploying spouse and all that. And they would bring in lecturers, and they would bring in, Rob Wolf, and they would bring in, whatever, Chris Kresser or John Wellborn, or, I think D'Agostino maybe came and lectured out, like whoever was like in the popular culture and health and wellness that people wanted to talk to. But that allowed me to meet all these guys, and like Lieutenant Colonel Grossman on killing. He's a psychologist that talks about the psychology of killing. And these guys all, we're on this health and wellness lecture circuit. Rob had his podcast. He was one of the first podcasters. And, they invited me on their podcast and started recommending me to the lecture symposiums they were going to. And I started traveling and doing lectures and going on people's podcasts. And before you knew it, I was this sleep guy. Because I cut the punchline out, but when I got guys to quit taking Ambien every night and drinking, so a lot of them were, taking their Ambien with a couple of cocktails. But once I got people to cut all that out, amazingly, they had enormous improvements in all of their anabolic markers and huge decreases in inflammatory markers and improved insulin sensitivity, and their brain function was back, and their concentration was back, and their mood was more stable. And there were, there's a lot of traumatic brain injury in the SEAL teams as well, just from the blast forces. So that's a component. So it's not like everybody came out of there feeling like they were 25 again, but it made a huge difference for all the guys. And, because they couldn't just take their sleep drugs away and say, tough, suck it up, man. I had to give them something. And I actually just worked with the guys and just said, hey, I've read this helps. I've read this helps. I know a significant amount about sleep physiology now, and I think this would help, and this is why it would help. And we just kind of worked out like what to include and how much of what to include. And the guys would come back and report to me every day, and we had a ton of success. And we found kind of like this concoction that they called the Doc Parsley sleep cocktail is what they called it. And it was, 7 different supplements, but this was pre-Amazon. So they were having to go buy this over here and that over there. And this was a 90-day supply that came in a 30-day supply. These were pills. These were liquids. This was powder. They couldn't travel with it. It's a pain in the butt. And so they harangued me into making a product out of that. And I called it Doc Parsley Sleep Cocktail, which is apparently the worst marketing name ever invented because everybody thinks it's alcohol or has something to do with alcohol. And, I really made it to sell back to the SEAL teams and, to get the guys on it. And the reason I made it the way I did is so they could just like grab some packets and throw them in their pocket and then have to worry about it. And surprisingly, I turned it into a business. So
that's great.
So now I'm like I'm the sleep guy with a sleep supplement who never sought out either. Well, it was just to solve a problem. Yeah.
That's great. Well, you're undoing the standard medical system where they just throw a pill at something and it never works. There's always these consequences. Yeah. So what's up with sleep not working when you just use a pill like Ambien?
Well, so, sleep is really complex. It's really complex and it's really nuanced. So we think of it as this category of like a behavior, right? But if somebody asked me what goes on while you're asleep, my first answer would be, well, what goes on when you're awake? It's the same question, right? Because a lot of things go on when you're awake. 16 hours you're awake and you're doing a lot of different things. Well, while you're asleep for 8 hours, you're doing a lot of different things. It's not like one continuous state. So everything you do, anything you do that messes with the normal, cascade of events that make you fall asleep and keep you asleep and cycle you through your sleep cycles and then gradually wake you up. Like that's all brain chemistry. It's like your brain chemistry is changing every second for these 8 hours. Like things are switching around. And so when you first go to sleep, you go into so your sleep cycles are 90 to 120 minutes, which means that goes from being awake down into deep sleep, some period of time in deep sleep, come back through being awake, essentially go into some REM sleep, come back down to approximately the wake state. And this information is gathered through lots of different sources. So this is your pulse. This is your respiratory rate. This is how much you're moving. This is brain waves in certain areas. This is your eyes moving. There's all sorts of things involved to measure these, but we know that it looks like this little geographic, and it's these stair steps. You go stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1, back into REM. And that is about 90 to 120 minutes. When you first do that, when you first go to sleep, that first cycle is 80 to 90% deep sleep. And then it changes every sleep cycle to be more REM and less deep. And then your last sleep cycle before you wake up in the morning, it's like 80% REM and very small amount of deep. So when you go into the way I explain deep sleep is it's the exact opposite of fight or flight. And this is the easy way to remember it. So most people are familiar with fight or flight. You have this automatic nervous system that runs everything in your body. Right now it's running our heart rate, our liver function, our kidneys function, our blood pressure, all sorts of things. We aren't aware of it. We aren't playing along. Like it's just going or whatever. Right. So that system has like something that speeds it up and something that slows it down. Parasympathetic slows it down. S for speed. Sympathetic speeds it up. When you get under a lot of stress, maximum sympathetic tone is what we call fight or flight. And fight or flight is that 100% of your resources are marshaled for you to fight or flee. So if a tiger jumps out of a bush, you don't want to fight a tiger. You want to figure a way to flee from him. If somebody wants to get in a fist fight with you, maybe you're going to fight them, right? But whatever, 100% of your resources are going to go to this, because it doesn't matter if you can digest food. It doesn't matter if you can fight off infection. It doesn't matter if your kidneys are working. It doesn't matter if your liver. None of that matters if you don't get away from the tiger. So you take 100% of your resources, and you will use anything in your body. You will eat your own body. Like, it's a catabolic state. So you're going to start pulling all of your sugar stores out of your cells and getting into your bloodstream. You're going to start breaking down muscles to get amino acids. Like, you are doing everything to get out of this situation. And that's kind of like being a Superman. But the reason we don't run around like that is because you'd only last a couple of days. And you'd kill yourself. You'd sort of eat yourself and stress yourself out. So the exact opposite of that is deep sleep. So when you're in fight or flight, you're faster, you're stronger, your reflexes are faster, your pain threshold is higher. Like, your pupils are dilated, your lungs fill more, like everything is superhuman, but it's physical. All of the stuff that makes you repair and keeps you alive, reproductive hormones, your anabolic hormones, fighting off infection, fighting off parasite, damaging, repairing damaged tissues, tendons, ligaments, muscles that you've overused, flushing toxins out of your brain, or like whatever. All of this stuff, I don't know if I said digestion, but digestion, liver functions, liver has some highly specialized functions that's doing more of that at night. And all of this, none of these anabolic things are happening when you're in fight or flight, because that's not what you're about, right? But all of that's happening during deep sleep. And you think about it, your body's useless, right? You don't have strength, speed, coordination, like all that other stuff. So it's the exact opposite. So you go through this deep sleep cycle. This first, when you flush all these toxins out of your brain, you start secreting growth hormone, you start secreting testosterone, you start secreting thyroid, you start balancing all of your hormones to be in this highly anabolic state. And then you start repairing all your tissues, and you start pruning things off of your neurons, these little what's called dendrites, these little bitty nubs that grow on your neurons, which a lot of them are useless, and you're shaving those off and you're reinforcing. So you're learning, so anything you learn, if you learn to juggle or play a piano or type, or if you're learning some sort of physical skill, an athletic skill, when you're asleep is when you're actually learning it. So you're practicing it, rehearsing it during the day, but it's still like in the peripheries of your mind, and it's very fragile. Then when you go to sleep, that gets consolidated, and then it gets buried into these durable tracks in your brain, and it forms connections to stuff you already know. And so now you can work with that information more, conscious information or subconscious information, something like, a lot of muscle movements, subconscious, but you can work with all this stuff. So you're actually getting better. Everything you're trying to get better at, it doesn't matter if you're learning math, learning to play a guitar, learning how to play a sport, doesn't matter. The only time you get better is when you're asleep. And so when you take a sleep drug, it distorts all of that. And how much does it distort it? Depends on the drug, depends on you, depends on what type of drug you're taking, depends on what else you're taking. Are you doing it with alcohol? Depends on how long you've been taking this drug. It depends on how many supplements you're adding into that. But the basic idea of it is sleep is our opportunity to repair from today. Like this contract you're born into, right? You're born into a contract that you're going to die, right? We all know we're going to die. Another contract that you're born into that everybody wants to deny is that it takes 8 hours to repair from 16 hours of being awake. That's built in. Like that contract's built in. You can't do anything about that. So when you take sleep drugs, you think if you just decrease the sleep architecture, the sleep efficacy by 25%, that's the same as sleeping 6 hours instead of sleeping 8 hours. And now what if you sleep 6 hours like most Americans? Now you're dealing with like 4 hours, 4.5 hours worth of sleep. So you're getting about half the recovery. You're getting about half the learning. You're getting about half the repair to your tissues. You're getting about half of the hormones, secretions, all of that stuff. You're only getting about half. And then you wake up tomorrow. If the whole purpose of going to sleep tonight is to prepare me for tomorrow, and I don't get enough sleep, tomorrow still comes. So how do I get it? How do I get through the day? I use stress hormones, right? I use the same stress hormones that put me in fight or flight. I don't use as much. I don't go into fight or flight, but I use them. And I told you, those are catabolic. Those are eating your body. Those are breaking you down. Those are impairing your brain function. Those are making you weaker and slower and older. That's essentially what aging is. If you repaired 100% every night, you would wake up exactly the same every day. You don't repair 100% every night. And so that's, when you say Ambien, I don't care if it's Ambien or super high doses of melatonin, like a tiny bit of melatonin, I think it's all right. Or a moderate amount of melatonin if you're just using it for a few days for jet lag or something. But all the sleep drugs, they work on GABA analogs. So like, one of the things that happens is you produce this peptide in your brain. I don't know. Do you want me to go into all that right now? Or I feel like I'm just running away.
We covered a lot. Yeah. Well, we could go into each thing. I want to kind of drop into each thing.
Okay.
Well, first, even just what affects your sleep and that it's not all just a drug like Ambien. Like alcohol is sort of a drug that will put you to sleep in a sense, but it's not the real recovery sleep.
Right. And there, and something I say a lot in my lectures and on podcasts is that there's a very distinct difference. Like if we take you into a facility to do a polysomnograph, which the sleep studies, we put all these electrodes over you and all these devices to measure aspects of how much you're moving, how fast are you breathing, are your eyes moving around, what do your brain waves look like, what's your pulse, what's your oxygen saturation, all this stuff. We're measuring all of that. And that helps us determine what sleep phase you're in, which isn't most biologists, it's descriptive, right? So we see something, this combination, we call that delta sleep or theta sleep or whatever. So when you go to sleep, I mean, you really have to, I don't think there's a way to talk about it without talking about the way it should work, right? So physiologically, most people know this now. The blue light decreases in the sky. We have nerves in the back of our eyes that sense blue light. They're not visual. They have nothing to do with vision. They just sense blue light. When blue light goes away, that starts a cascade of events, and it puts the signal back down through our brain. It goes through the circuitous pathway. It goes through the suprachiasmatic nucleus. A lot of people have heard of the SCN. It's like the master clock in the brain. It keeps winding around. It goes to a gland in the back of our brain called the pineal gland that secretes melatonin. Melatonin is a hormone that's like the starter pistol of this whole thing. That I got that from Matt Walker. Love it. So you initiate it. And then that initiation leads to hundreds, if not thousands of other chemical changes in the brain. But one of the most important things about it is it produces this peptide called GABA, capital GABA. And it stands for gamma aminobutyric acid, not really important. But what GABA does is it slows down the neocortex. So when you think of the human brain, like the pictures we see of the human brain with all the wrinkles and that kind of curved crescent shape, double crescent shape, that's what I'm calling the neocortex. And then we have this brain stem that goes underneath it. And that's where that autonomic stuff is that we're talking about, that, and the hormone secretion, that's all coming from this piece down here, this neocortex. This is how we interact with the world. So our sensory is in there, our motor, our soft touch, our smell, our taste, our visuals, all in there. And then our ability to move out and touch stuff, those motor, and then our ability to talk, all of that is built into that. So this is how we interact with the world. What GABA does is it slows down our interaction with the world. So I'm getting to your point here. All being asleep means is that you're no longer paying attention to your environment. Now, I could hit you in the head with a baseball bat, and that would be true. You could chug a bottle of whiskey, and that would be true. You can take an Ambien, and that would be true. But none of those are sleep, right? Right? If you see someone getting knocked out, you don't go, well, look, he's asleep. I mean, you might as a colloquialism, but you know he's not asleep. You know that's something different. Well, sleep drugs are the same way. Like those things aren't happening. So if GABA floats around in your brain, it has to have a receptor on a cell. Like everything just about has just about everything important has a receptor. So, cells have walls to keep stuff out, and they have receptors, the stuff they'll take in. So you have GABA flowing around, this receptor binds it, and then it folds and it brings it into the cell and it uses it. So if GABA slows down your brain to make you not pay attention to your environment as much, and GABA binds this receptor and pulls it in, it slows that neuron down by, like, say 20%, right? Makes it 20% harder for that neuron to fire. So it's slowing it down. It's decreasing the activity. Well, the pharmaceutical industry said, well, when people can't sleep, their brains are racing, right? And they have like all this on their minds. So how do we shut their minds off? Well, GABA does that, right? So let's make something that acts like GABA. So the first thing they made was benzodiazepines, so Xanax and Valium and these types of things, and they act like GABA. Well, if I have this receptor and I have a GABA and it pulls it in and it does a function, we'll call that function 1 out of 10. That's a 1, right? It does that much, 1. Now I have this receptor and I put in Valium and it binds that, pulls it in, 1 out of 10, it does 100. You'll never get, this is more GABA effects than you are capable of generating ever in your life. Then they said, well, those drugs are addictive. They have this problem, that we're going to make a better drug. And they came up with these Z drugs. They call them still GABA analogs, act like GABA. And this is Lunesta and Ambien. Now the receptor here, Ambien binds, pulls it in, 1 out of 10, it does 1,000. So what it does, it makes those neurons completely incapable of firing, and it just shuts the brain down. But then you don't have the predictable brainwave patterns. You don't have all these changes that we're talking about. You don't have the same hormone secretions, like all this stuff. It's more like being unconscious than it is like being asleep. I didn't test all the SEALs, but I tested a lot of them. I had a lot of them do sleep studies. Every single guy that I had tested, and these guys were using Ambien, every single one of them came back 99% stage 2 sleep, which isn't really even on the restorative side, right? The restorative is sleep. So it's like the transition of sleep. Yeah. So like you go from deep sleep, or you go from being awake, you go through stage 2, and then you go into deep sleep 3 and 4. Yeah. Then you come back out and you go through 2 to get back to 1, but it's just a transitional phase. Like there's a little more going on, but like, it's not the regenerative stuff. It's not fighting off infection. It's not repairing. It's not flushing toxins out of your brain. It's not forming good neuron. It's not forming durable neural pathways. It's not emotionally categorizing events. It's not, all of the stuff that we talked about earlier that sleep does. That doesn't happen in stage 2. So, and then once they started getting successfully sued, so this was again 2009, before Ambien got a bad name. And they rightfully got a bad name because a lot of people were doing some really weird stuff on Ambien, and they got successfully sued. And when they got sued, then they had to produce more of their research. And once the research came out, it was ridiculous that this drug was ever approved, because it had this known side effect of complete dissociation. You and I could have this whole podcast while I was on Ambien. I would sound just like I am right now. And then we could wake me up tomorrow and say, hey, that was a good podcast. I'll be, what are you talking about? I have no recollection of that whatsoever. And your basal brain, like your lizard brain, takes over, which is, like reproduction, food. And so people go pick up hookers and buy a box of donuts and all, and they don't have any recollection of doing it. So they got sued lots of times, and then they had to produce their data. And what their data showed was that you fell asleep on average, I want to say it was like 13 minutes faster, and you slept for an extra 36 minutes or something. But your sleep architecture was destroyed by like 80%. So it was way worse for you than not getting sleep. And
well, of course they don't want that out.
Right. Yeah. And so those went in there because when the pharmaceutical industry applies to the FDA to get approval for a drug, the pharmaceutical industry does their own research. And then they hand the research to the FDA and say, here's what we got. What do you think? Well, they cherry pick it, right? It's like the bad stuff. They're like, nah, that doesn't look so good. Let's leave that there. So we did 300 studies. Here's 30 of them. And then they get approval. But then when they get scrutinized, they have to then produce everything. And that's how we found out. So, that drug lost its that was probably the most popular drug in America at that time. And everybody thought it was just without consequence. Just take this drug, get great sleep, and you'll be fine. And didn't turn out to be true. And they lost, I think they've lost 80% of the market share or something by now. So
good.
Now they're trying to control everything else, to try to get back into the sleep game. Because fortunately, nobody was talking about sleep in 2009, 2010, but now it's everywhere. It's like popular media everywhere. There's sleep experts all over the damn place. Everywhere I go, I meet another sleep expert. Yeah.
Well, I feel like everyone has their own thing that they're into, and then they make their health paradigm based around that. Right. There's people who it's all about exercise, or it's all about glyphosate. It's like glyphosate's killing us. Actually, my last podcast, it was cool. It was great. Dr. Stephanie was a great researcher, but maybe it's not all glyphosate. Right. But with sleep, I think could be something there. Where I was thinking about this, because I am learning more about sleep. I'm like, what if it is all about sleep, where you eat better and you're getting better sleep because you ate better, and you exercise and you're getting better sleep. And
you eat better because you slept well, because your appetite's regulated by how well you slept.
But it's like sleep is at the center of it. Because I'm a nutrition person, right? It's like the food you eat. And I think you mentioned this before with like the Rob Wolf type of stuff. Right? Yeah. It's like he's all about the food and a little sleep. You're all about the sleep and a little food. So they definitely go hand in hand. Right. But there is something with that sleep, because even sleep apnea, I've interviewed some doctors about sleep apnea. And if you get healthier and you lose weight and stuff like that, your sleep apnea gets better and you get better sleep. Right. So it's like there could be
just when your hormones get better, your sleep apnea can go away. Is you have this, what's called neuromuscular tension, right? So you have the reason you can tell somebody looks dead, like that's an unnatural look, because they lose neuromuscular tension. So we hold ourselves, even when we're asleep, we hold ourselves in a certain way that they're like, my muscles not totally relaxed when it's just laying here. And so when your anabolic hormones are higher, you have a higher neuromuscular tension. Well, that applies to the back of your throat too, right? And that's what's collapsing when you're asleep. So I've seen people just get their hormones back in order and their sleep apnea goes away. And the problem with poor sleep and what you're saying, I've been saying this for a decade, is like, it's the worst sales pitch in the world. Like, what's the worst sales pitch you can make? It's the snake oil salesman. Like, this cures everything.
It's a cure-all, yeah.
But it's pretty hard to argue against that when it comes to sleep, because like I said earlier, sleep is when you get better at everything. Sleep is where you repair from everything.
And you would never age if you didn't.
Right.
I kind of believe that. It's like, well, your environment.
I mean, you see it happen with kids, right? Little kids, they tear themselves up all day, right? They're super active. They're doing a lot of stuff. They go to bed, they sleep 12 hours, they recover. They come out the next day better, right? They come out, they might be actually taller. They may be measurably taller. They look, they're a little sharper. Like, you're seeing them grow. They're getting better every day. At some age, we kind of start plateauing, and it's like, well, we're just going to try to hold on to this as long as we can. And, it seems like a small thing to miss 30 minutes of sleep, but miss 30 minutes of sleep over 30 years. That's a lot of aging. That's a big deal, right? And, sleep quality tends to get worse as we get older. There's lots of reasons behind that. It doesn't have to, though. I've got an 82-year-old woman who hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night in 20 years. I got her sleeping 8 hours a night. It was just a lot of coaching. I mean, 90% of what I do is coaching. Like I work lifestyle.
Yeah.
And what you were saying earlier is when I first started all this lecture, I said when I do my SEAL lectures and when I started getting other lecture gears from that, I'd say one of my first slides was there's 4 pillars of health: sleep, nutrition, exercise, and stress mitigation, mindfulness, whatever you want to call that pillar. And over the years, as I drank more and more of my own Kool-Aid and learned more and more about sleep and worked with more patients, it's like, no, sleep's the foundation for the other 3 pillars, because poor sleep destroys all the efforts everywhere else, and good sleep enhances the efforts in everywhere else. So you can't really, and I know they're all intertwined, but if I get up today and I eat a poor diet today, and then I don't tomorrow, and I didn't the day before, right? Like I might feel a little worse in my gut or something, but I'm not really changing my health status. Don't sleep one night or sleep 4 hours one night. You've changed your health status. You've changed your aptitude, your capabilities. You've changed whether or not you should even work out. This is one of the hardest things for me to coach people on, because a lot of all my clients are these super high achievers, and a lot of them have, they're triathletes on top of being entrepreneurs, whatever. And so they have like their workout schedule. And I'm like, no, you aren't sleeping enough to work out. Like, you aren't recovering. And, sometimes I have to get them HRV, train them on HRV to prove it to themselves. Like, if you only sleep 6 hours and you need 8 hours, doing CrossFit is a dumb idea, right? You can go be active. You can go to the gym and like move stuff around, get blood flowing, but you don't go in there and try to get better at anything. You're just trying to maintain what you have by being active that day.
Well, so some people think they can get by on 6 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
So I know that there's studies that disprove that.
Yeah. That's the one good thing about, unlike your field, like, I used to try to really get smart on nutrition, because Rob Wolf's one of my best friends in the world, and he's the guy who kind of got me into this world. And I've talked nutrition with him for, forever. And there's so much controversy in nutrition and in the research. There's no controversy in sleep medicine. Nobody's trying to say you need less than 8 hours of sleep. No scientists, at least. So what happens, and then this is really interesting, and this is what makes my job difficult, and it makes it hard to sell sleep. I mean, if you think about it, we're born knowing how to sleep. Sleep feels good. It's comfortable. It's warm. It's safe. It should be really easy to sell, right? It should be like selling sex. It should be the easiest thing, but it's the hardest thing when I work with people. This is the hardest thing, to get them to commit that many hours to be in bed. And it doesn't make a lot of sense, but the I don't know. So the gist of it is, when you look at everything else that you could possibly be doing, sleep is unquestionably the most powerful tool that you have to change anything either way. Unfortunately, you don't have a good subjective experience as to whether or not you slept well. If you slept really great, you don't remember anything about sleeping. It's kind of hard for me to tell people, oh, you got great sleep. Now we have wearable devices and stuff now, which we didn't, that's fairly new. That makes things easier. Not everybody's into that. And not all those things are accurate. Not everybody fits the algorithms, and there's some problems with that, but you're trying to convince people, do this thing that you already know how to do, that you feel is a waste of time. Do more of it. If you do it great, you won't remember it whatsoever, and it's going to make you better. It's kind of it's a really hard sell.
But what was that study where the people's performances declined,
right?
And they didn't know it. Well, that's part of it.
I was about to get into that, right? Just about to get into it. So we convince ourselves, because, if you think about look at where we are right now, what we're doing, what we're wearing, what we're, we can over time train ourselves to do just about anything, right? Humans can adapt to any environment. And one of the things that we do when we deprive ourselves of sleep is that becomes our new norm, right? And I'm as guilty as this is anyone. I wish I could say I've always known this, but I spent at least a decade sleeping probably less than 5 hours a night, because I was getting after it. I was doing stuff, man, and what happens is you lose your self-assessment, your self-awareness, your subjective sense of your performance. And sleep deprivation has been compared many times to blood alcohol levels. And so they have people side by side perform tasks, the same types of tasks you would get in a field sobriety test or just driving or something. And it's really close. And so if you're awake for 20 to 24 hours, most people are right around the legal cutoff limit. And that's just in performance. Now there's some bigger problems, is that there's things called micro sleeps, which can hit you, and you can you're even more dangerous behind the wheel. But your impairment, your ability to speak, your ability to read people's emotions, to communicate, to solve problems, coordination, really similar. If you're awake for 48 hours in a row, you're like tanked. You're just like a blood alcohol level of 0.2. And so you're an absolute mess, but you think you're fine because you slowly got into it. Just like with alcohol, you have a couple of drinks and you're impaired. You have 8 drinks. You're like, I'm fine. What are you talking about? I feel great. And so the study you're talking about, one of the things we did to kind of figure out how much sleep people need is to let people sleep as much as they need to sleep until they don't need to sleep that much anymore. And so the first trials were done, bunker trials, they were called, and it was done by William Dement, who's the godfather of sleep medicine in America. And they took, I think it was almost all college kids. They put them in these World War II bunkers, and there's this cold, dark room. It just had a cot and a toilet in it, and that was it. And they locked them in that room for 14 hours a day. No light, cold, cot. Or maybe it's a bed, I don't know. And the average student slept 12 and a half hours. And then over the course of 4, 6, 8 weeks, everybody ended up sleeping about 8 hours, which means that they are laying awake for 6 hours in a cold, dark room with nothing to do. So once you do that, we can say, well, you're sleep adapted, right? Like you don't have a sleep debt. We know that this is how much sleep you need. And the interesting thing, you don't
need more. Yeah. At that point, they didn't need more.
Right.
Like you said, they had nothing else to do. So there was no advantage to sleeping.
Yeah. And there's no advantage to them to obviously go. There's no physiologic advantage for them to go back to sleep, or they would have been able to, right? So it's like, this is how much sleep you need. And so they were all sleeping about 8 hours a night. This is where this number comes from. This is how we know. I mean, and then of course, we can look back ancestrally and look at journaling and stuff. And we know that's about how long people have always slept. And we study hunter-gatherer tribes today who've never experienced electricity. They sleep 7.5 to 8 hours a night. So we call that sleep adaptation. So now you can say, all right, you've paid back your sleep debt. We know you don't, we know you aren't in a sleep deficit, and you need 8.5 hours of sleep every night. And so we get a group of people together and we say, we're going to take 2 hours away from you. So if you normally need 8.5, you're going to get 6.5. If you normally need 8, you're going to get 6. All right. And then we wake them all up the next morning and then either test them at a skill they already have or some performance metrics they already have, like track and field runner or, something coordinated or whatever. It doesn't matter. Math problems, typing. We test them at a skill they already have, or we teach them a new skill. It doesn't matter. We just, and then we see how they do when they're sleep adapted, and you give them a couple of days of this, and then you have a baseline of their performance. And then the next day you say, all right, we're going to take away 2 hours of sleep. Right. So I jumped into that. So we start the baseline testing, and then 2 hours, we take 2 hours away from everybody. And then we test them again the next morning after they've missed 2 hours, and they'll do worse. And then you ask them, how do you think you did? I did worse. I was tired. I didn't do well. Yeah. Day 2, same thing. Day 3, maybe the same thing. By day 4, everybody will tell you, I did as well as I've ever done. I'm used to the sleep schedule. I felt fine. I think I did well. Nope. Here's the data. You're still hold up the chart. You're still getting worse every single day. You're not just as bad as you were yesterday. You're worse today. And you're getting worse every single day, even when you think you're not getting worse. Now there is a plateau, or we would all be useless, right? But what never plateaus is error rate, which is why I think coders should be the most sleep conscious people in the world, right? Because one error in coding can be a huge nightmare, right? So there's some jobs that like these little errors matter a lot. Medicine's a job that, a small error makes a huge difference, right? So the error rate will never stop. So there was a study that was done where they sleep adapted, then they gave people 8 hours, and there was a performance line that was like gradually getting better. 6 hours, a performance line that was getting gradually worse. 4 hours, much steeper curve. What they found, because most people, when I talk about staying awake for 24 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours, people are like, I don't do that. Right. So like, it doesn't apply to me. Well, what they established is, okay, well, if you sleep 6 hours a night instead of 8, you're missing 2 hours of sleep per night. By day 11, I believe, you performed as exactly as you would have if you hadn't slept for 24 hours, which I said is that it's on par with being drunk, like the threshold of being drunk by blood alcohol level. And then is day 22, 23, it was the same as not being awake or staying awake for 48 hours. And if you've ever stayed awake for 48 hours, you know you're really impaired. But if you take 22 days to get there, you don't know you're impaired. And then that just becomes people's baseline, and they sleep 6 hours a night every night. And maybe they catch up on the weekend and gets a little better here and there. But for the most part, a lot of us spend our entire adult lives performing as though we're drunk. And then the really interesting thing is now when you do drink alcohol, has literally twice the effect. So you're a little sleep deprived, you have 1 beer, it's the same as having 2 beers. You have 2 beers, it's the same as having 4. You shouldn't be driving. Even if you're a big guy and you know your blood alcohol level is probably only 0.3, you can double that. It's 0.6 essentially.
Wow.
Or 0.03, not 3.
Yeah, no, I feel like a lot of people just go through life thinking that they're being so productive and they say they can survive on 6 hours of sleep. But I think very few people can. So you mentioned Matthew Walker. So I read his book. Do you agree with most everything?
Yeah, I love his book. I was surprised how many similar metaphors we have. And he explained, I actually learned quite a bit in the book. I didn't know 90% of his stuff when he starts talking about how other mammals behave and like these studies they've done with all of that. Like I didn't know any of that stuff. But yeah, I thought it was a really well-written book. I know there's a lot of people who think it's hyperbolic and it was too negative, but I think the intention of that was to be sobering. And it is accurate to say that you're getting worse every single day that you're not sleeping well. And it is accurate to say it's going to impact your health and that it doubles, triples, quadruples your risk of dying of any cause and getting any disease, depending on how long you're not sleeping. And if it's, shift work and all that, it is true that the World Health Organization has classified shift work as a type 2A carcinogen, which means that probably causes cancer, but it's unethical to test it. So we aren't going to test it, but that's the same thing. Cigarettes were called type 2A carcinogens. We know that people who work shift work die on average 12 to 14 years earlier than their peers. We know that people who use sleep drugs chronically, which is only defined as over 6 months consecutively, they die at the same rate as shift workers, about 12 to 14 years earlier. And people with chronic insomnia, same thing. I don't think the sleep drugs are doing anything to that. I think you have people who've chronic insomnia who aren't getting good sleep for decades. Those people die younger, whether or not they take the sleep drugs is what I think. I don't think there's anything specifically about the sleep drugs that are causing you to die sooner. It's just sleep deprivation. And we know that enough sleep deprivation kills people. There's a reason we use sleep deprivation as a way to interrogate people, torture people, break them down. It breaks you really fast. It destroys all your resources really quickly.
And so how many people are actually okay genetically sleeping 6 hours or less?
About this. Well, no, I take it back. So this super sleeper gene or sets of, there's, I think 3, maybe 4 now. These super sleeper genes, what people believe is that the super sleeper gene means that you only need 4 hours or 6 hours or whatever. That's not true. What it says is a lot like every other genetic advantage, is that the deleterious effects of sleep deprivation are not as bad on you. Yeah. So you don't suffer as badly. If I have the gene and you don't, we both sleep 6 hours. You're way worse off than I am, but I still have deficits. It's just not, my deficits aren't as great. And like I said, we've done these bunker trials, and if you let people sleep to, and the bunker trials, it's not like that's happened once. That's probably been done 1,000 times across all different cultures, all different age groups. And this works every time, right? Like we know that that's about how much sleep you need. And so if you test these people, I mean, when I said the 6 hours goes up to like 11 days is the same as 24 hours and 22 days is the same as not sleeping for 48 hours. These people is probably double that, right? Like after they've done maybe 45 days, then they're performing like that, or maybe it's triple, but either way, like they're just getting worse more slowly. So as far as I know, again, this is one of the great things about the consistency of the sleep research. There's no data out there saying that anybody does their best on less than roughly 8 hours. And that changes a little. Like you don't need, if you're an 8 hour sleeper, you don't need exactly 8 hours every night. Some nights you need a little more, some nights you get away with a little less, but that's approximately how much you need.
Interesting. Cause I feel like there's so many people, there's like 20% of the population thinks I'm one of these gifted people.
Well, right. I never answered your question. It's twice as unlikely as getting hit by lightning. That's literally the statistical odds.
So it's very rare, yet like maybe more, like 30% of people, they're like, I don't need sleep. Like I just wake up early.
Everybody thinks they know one of those people. Like, no, you don't. Like there's so few. Like maybe, I guess if you're like a Fortune 500 CEO or something, or like a professor at a competitive Ivy League program or something, those people probably are more productive and you're going to end up in, professions like that. So maybe you could know multiple, but it's a really, really rare thing. Like how many people do you know that get struck by lightning? Cut that number in half. And that's probably how many people you know with this gene.
Wow. Yeah. I think a lot of people are just fooling themselves.
Oh, for sure. Well, and like I said, there's very poor awareness. Like we don't know that we're doing worse. Yeah. And the people that we're admiring, he only sleeps 4 hours a night. And look at this. He did this. He went to that. He went to night school, ran a business, had kids. He's done all this amazing stuff.
And he got Alzheimer's.
Well, yeah. And you don't know, what I always say to these people is how do you know he wouldn't have been twice as amazing if he slept 8 hours a night, right? So it's like, he's this high power lawyer in downtown, whatever, and he's a weekend physicist in his house. He's an amazing guy. It's like, okay, well, maybe if he slept 8 hours a night, he would be Elon Musk's competition. Right? It could be.
Yeah. There's going to be repercussions down the road.
We don't know what it's like it's like the longevity stuff. People always want to talk to me about, my clients always want to talk to me about longevity. I'm like, I have no idea if I can make you live longer because I don't know when you're going to die. Yeah. You might die tomorrow. You might not die for another 30 years. And if you die 27 years from now, did I do anything that had any impact on that? I don't know. Right. Like it's just hard. It's hard to say. All we can say is work towards the healthiest thing you can do and constantly seek the performance that's right for you. Some people really don't care that much about performance. Like, for them, performance is like I get up every day and I don't feel like murdering anybody. And like that's success, right? And some people are, well, I want to do that, not this. I want to be a better parent. I want to have 6-pack abs. I want to make this much money. All right, well, these are your priorities. Let's enhance your performance. The very first thing we do to enhance your performance before we look at your hormones, before we do anything, look at your sleep.
Well, that's interesting because I know in your practice that you like won't even really treat someone until they get their sleep.
Right. And
I've never heard that before.
When I do an intake on, there's an application to work with me, and the application says, 10 times on every page, you're going to need to make sleep your number one priority while you're working with me. And then also 10 times on your page, I'm not your physician. I'm a consultant. You need a physician. We're going to work with your physician. I'm a consultant. I'm a coach. I'm here to, I'm really, like I said, I'm really helping people with their lifestyle. That's 90% of what I'm doing. There's of course there's some pharmacology. Usually in the hormone realms, in the older, the over 40, 45-ish kind of men, there's usually some hormone stuff. Maybe there's some peptide stuff, but I'm really just kind of a health coach that can prescribe medication.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And it's really psychology. I spend my days convincing people of things they don't want to be true. That's the truth of it. Like that's the most accurate statement. That's what I do for a living. I convince people of things that they don't want to be true.
That's kind of what all health coaches do, or what I do, but it's about food or lifestyle.
Right.
It's like I have to just get, like, they know it, but I have to convince. I don't even do that much of it. I mean, I work with Dr. Gary, and we have a clinic in LA, but I'm not doing that much health coaching. But it's like they know they need to eat whole foods and they need to avoid the processed foods, but then you have to convince them in 10 different ways to do it. And that's just where we're at as humans. I think it's a modern lifestyle. It's so mismatched of like what we should be living and how exciting and interesting and all these flavors are and all these things to do. Why people don't want to sleep. They want to play video games.
Right.
So it's
or
like
watch another movie. Like, what? I just want to watch one more episode of my show. And and there's simple things that you learn, and I'm sure you would have your own examples, but it's really simple things you learn over the course of working with people for years. And you come up with something one time that's really powerful, and you write that down, and you use that with all your clients. And one of the things I came up with a long time ago is really common. I was really surprised how many people would say, well, I only got this much because, like, I was kind of watching my show. It was a great episode. I just wanted to watch one more. And I did the one more, just 45 minutes. I cut it off, went to bed. And I'm like, all right, I get it. Like, I get it. That show is obviously important to you. So I think knowing you and your health issues and what we're trying to do, it'd be more beneficial if you set an alarm for an hour early and wake up the next morning and watch that before you get ready for work. How many people do you think do that? Nobody. And I'm like, okay, well, if you won't do that, then don't. Right. If you won't get up an hour early, don't stay up an hour late. And that's kind of the one. Yeah. That's the acid test for no. It doesn't matter what it is. Like, will you get up an hour early to do this tomorrow? No, then don't stay up an hour late tonight to do it, because it's the same thing.
I love that. Also, I think sleep is the one thing. It's like, I think there's these certain foundational things in nature. You can't cheat nature. I love the phrase, like, there's no free lunches in nature.
Right.
So I keep bringing this up on different episodes, but I'll tell you, and you tell me what you think these pillars are that you can't cheat. Like, we have pills that can cheat some things.
Right.
Allergy pills will cheat nature in a sense,
right.
But you can't cheat nature in certain things. You can't cheat nature in sleep. I don't think we'll ever just give a magic pill to someone and they can sleep 4 hours.
It would have to be a pill that secreted 1,000 different hormones in some predictable pattern that knew exactly what your brain did. It's way too complex.
It seems
way
impossible.
Too many factors.
So, but what are those things you think? Because I know you do more than sleep. So I think it's just exercise. We'll never develop a machine that exercises for you. You have to do the work. That's the whole point, is you're doing the loading on the muscles. You can't have a machine that works out for you. And then the food, I don't think we're going to figure out fake foods that can mimic nature.
I think it's the most arrogant thing humans do, is to think that, this is my problem with, and I know people define it differently, but the sort of this concept of biohacking, to me, like, biohacking means that you want the result without having to go through the rigors of doing the work that gets to that result. So you're going to hack it and find some shortcut. What's more arrogant than to say, okay, the 200,000-year-old body, millions of years of evolution. This is a 200,000-year-old model. It really hasn't been updated in that long, in very long. Right? We evolved to be on this planet, to use the sun as our cue as to when to go to sleep. And we evolved to eat certain foods. We evolved to move a certain way. We evolved to be awake at certain times, asleep at certain times. And we evolved to have a certain level of stress that was survivable, right? And now we're just like, nah. I can make this fake food. I can make it cold when it's hot. I can make it light when it's dark. I can do anything I want. Get a machine, put electrodes on my abs, and I'm going to be ripped. Like, no, you're not. And if you get some sort of immediate gratification and marginal success, it's going to be short-lived, almost certainly. And I suspect almost everything that you do is going to have more negative consequences. Like, something I get so much pushback because I know the logic is slightly flawed on this. But I say this all the time, and you can't prove it, but the logic is pretty hard to escape. If you think about humans in an ancestral sense, how good of a predator are we without a weapon? What can we kill? a bird with a rock. I mean, that's a weapon. Now, like, what could we kill? Like, would you want to fight a raccoon if you were naked? Like, no, you didn't have we're terrible predators, right? So we're very easy prey. What makes us not easy prey is being smart, right? And being able to make weapons. So you think about, we evolved with all this dangerous prey in the world with us, right? These big cats, these bears, like all sorts of things that can maul us easy. Wolves, like all these things. And so how did we, and a lot of those things are nocturnal, right? And so we're very vulnerable, right? We have no senses. We're not aware of our environment by definition while we're asleep. And we're the most vulnerable. We're paralyzed. If we're in REM sleep, we can't even move unless we wake up, right? And if some genetic strand of people could have gotten away with 4 hours of sleep and recovered 100%, or recovered as much as we're recovering over 8 hours, evolution would have favored that. And maybe evolution favored the 8 hours. I mean, if you look at the top predators in the world, they sleep 16, 20 hours a day. So maybe our ancestors slept, 10, 12, 14 hours, and like the favored one that made you less vulnerable for half the time, where you only needed to sleep 8 hours. But if there were 4 hours, those people should have outcompeted us, right? And we haven't found that yet. We haven't found that anywhere in the world with any culture. Everybody needs about the same amount of sleep.
I love that. I think for one, I also don't like biohacking much. I like ancestral hacking, right? So it's like, I don't like all these gadgets and this and stuff. It's like, let's just mimic what we humans need.
Yeah, we're totally aligned on that,
right?
Man. That's I'm like 90% of all health problems can be solved by approximating the conditions that you evolved in.
Yeah.
Like, we evolved to be on this planet, and then we just sort of at one point decided we were so smart that we were done with the planet. Like, we got it from here, right? Yeah. Like, we're gonna live in buildings, we're gonna have air conditioning, we're gonna have heating, we're gonna have artificial lighting. We're not gonna walk anywhere anymore because we got cars, we got bicycles, we got motorcycles. We're gonna grow our own food in places where this doesn't grow. We're gonna mash up foods, put in other chemicals, do all sorts of things, make stuff out of grain, and we're gonna eat this food that was never even available to us. Like, ancestrally, we would have never been exposed to it, or even components of it. It's completely artificial stuff. And and now we're going to have these little dopamine machines on our hands that cause, stress and alert all the time with our phones ringing, or texting, or social media, all this other stuff. And we've so far removed ourselves from the way we evolved. There's no way we're getting the best performance out of this machine. Whether or not you're going to live as long, maybe the modern medicine and other things, and especially like emergent, okay, so maybe you're going to survive longer, but do you want more years of life, or do you want more life in your years, right? It's like, do you want, like, me personally, I'd rather die at 70, but be like strong and capable when I die, instead of like corroding away at 90. And I think most people feel that way. So yeah, I mean, I think most Neolithic disease has to do with us just saying, we don't need the environment that we grew up there, that we evolved in. We don't need to sleep when the sun's down. We don't need to eat whole foods. Like, I can choose to not eat a major component of my diet, right? Because like, my ancestors all ate meat. I guarantee you they all ate meat. I can't just choose to not eat meat and expect to have the health that, I mean, my ancestors formed this body, right? They encoded everything this body does through, millennia. I don't get to just choose to not do that because I think I got some supplement that somebody made in his garage a couple of years ago, and now they're making, widespread.
That's funny. Well, no, that's why you can't cheat nature. And I think the 4 things you can't cheat nature in are the 4 things you mentioned as the pillars. Yeah. It's like the sleep, the movement, the food, and the stress kind of thing. Like, I don't think you can take a pill that will just make you immune to stress. You'll be like a zombie. I mean, there'll be repercussions. Maybe you'll be like super mellow and on lithium or something. You're not going to be the same. So you can't cheat that. But yes, maybe you can cheat. We have airplanes. That's cheating nature. Right. But that's not the core foundations of being human.
Right. Right.
So that's that. Also, well, back to sleep. You're saying you just need 8 hours of sleep. I'm on board with that. I feel like, how do people work towards better sleep? For one, even beyond just being in bed.
Right.
That's what I want to work on too. Cause someone gave me one of these little rings. It's not an Oura ring, but it's like this little football thing that like has, I don't know. It does the same type of thing.
Mhm.
And it shows that I'm not getting that much deep sleep, but then some days I am, or I don't know. It's weird. So one thing is people need to spend enough time in bed.
Right.
So I think on the very top level, some people just don't even give themselves enough sleep.
Right.
So we talked about that, right? You're like, you have to make it a priority, and
Right.
you got to convince them that it's important. So that's the number one. I think that's 80% rule. It's like, if you're not in bed, if your alarm's at 6 and you're still up at midnight, you're screwed no matter what. You don't
Right.
need a gadget. You don't need like
Right.
a blue blocking this and all that.
Yeah,
you
you-
just need to get in bed.
Yeah. You don't need any tracking device to tell you that your 6 hours is going to be
Yeah.
inadequate.
So you get that. So most people just need to get in bed. But then this is my question: is how do I get to the next level of getting better, more restorative sleep?
Yeah. So here again, the good news is really consistent data and really easy to follow. So if you've ever had kids, or if you've ever been a kid, you'll remember this really long period of getting ready for bed, this sleep ritual, right? Just take a 2-year-old who's smashing trucks together and throw them into bed and turn the light out and walk out of the room, right?
Yeah.
We know that won't work. No one would even try it. Seems ridiculous, right? Well, we need that same thing. It's not as extensive, but we need the same thing. So the easy thing about sleep hygiene is just all you have to do is imagine what our ancestors do. Like, go back 2,000 years. Like, when would they go to sleep? We know, right? What would they eat? We know. What type of activity? We know, right? Like, we know all of this. So, I said earlier, I've already covered the two most important things for falling asleep. I said earlier that the blue light in our eyes goes down and it triggers the release of melatonin, and melatonin begins a biochemical cascade in our brain that goes, it's a symphony that lasts all night. It's changing all night. It's super complex. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to put this in there and put that in there and like everything, because by the time that gets in there, that might not be the important thing anyway. So so decrease the blue light in your eyes, because that's how you evolved. The other thing you have to do, though, is you have to decrease the stimulation to your brain. So I told you GABA slows down our neocortex, makes us pay less attention to our environment. If you think about it, while you're asleep, your eyes still work, your ears still work, your nose still works. You can still smell, you can still taste, you can still sense light touch, you can still sense pain, you can still sense heat, you can still move your muscles. Why is that? Because your brain isn't turning that off. It's just you're not paying attention to it. So your attention is elsewhere. But if you're asleep and I turn on the light, I can wake you up. Why? Because your eyes are still working. I can make a noise and wake you up because your ears are still working. You're just not paying attention to it. GABA helps you not pay attention to it. However, you can overpower GABA. You can play video games. You can watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre right before you go to bed. You can decide to go out with your friends and go to happy hour, go to a club where there's loud music and flashing lights and attractive people to you and whatever. And so you can overpower GABA. So those are the two most important things. So just think about it. Just picture a family of cavemen. And what do? The sun goes down. They're going to go crawl back to their cave, right? They're going to go where they're safe. They're going to get in a safe place because they can't see at night. And a lot of the predators can. And they're going to get around a fire. And when they're around a fire, I don't know if most people know this, but when you're around a fire, it destroys your field of vision. Like you can't see like 10 feet on the other side of a fire. Whereas if there were no fire, you'd be able to see a lot further. So it like really decreases what you can see and you can't really pay attention to much around you. So there's not much stimulation. Everything's going to be calm and whispered. You're not going to want to call attention to yourself if you're like this weak prey that can be maimed by anything. And then it takes about 3 hours. And we know this because we've studied hunter-gatherers who still live a hunter-gatherer lifestyle and they have no electricity and they've never seen electricity. And about 3 to 3.5 hours after the sun goes down, there's enough biochemical changes in their brain for them to feel sleepy. Now, the other thing that happens when the sun goes down, when you don't have heaters and air conditioners, is right, the sun cools down the earth. And so you get cooler, your body temperature goes down. Those are the 3 sleep hygiene things. Everything else you read, it's some somebody's attempts to fix one of those things, but that's all sleep hygiene is, right? Darkening out your room. That's less sensory, right? You know, wearing blue blocking glasses, putting F-Lux on your computer, like your iPhones, I guess, like all these things now can take the blue light out of the screen. Well, you're just mimicking that. Like that's okay. That's a sleep hygiene thing. Drop your body temperature, take a shower, like just doesn't have to be a cold shower, just like a not hot shower. That'll drop your body temperature. The reason we put kids in a bath, we drop their body temperature. Think about what you do as a little kid smashing trucks together. Settle down, Johnny, right? No more truck smashing. You go over here and work on this puzzle, dimming the lights around the house, right? Go take them, put them in a bath. Why you put them in a bath? You're going to drop their body temperature. Then you pull them out. You put them in these ridiculous, comfortable clothes. You put powder all over them, decreasing sensation to the skin. Put them in a warm, comfortable bed. You get in next to them, make them feel secure and safe. You read them a story. The best story to read them, the story they already know. They know every word to it, because you don't want them paying attention to it, right? You just want it to be a melody. That's the reason Dr. Seuss was so successful with, they had this rhythmic tone to them. You're just lulling your kids to sleep. It's the lullaby, right? And, you know, once enough of this has been done, their body temperature's low, their sensory has been decreased, the light's been decreased, they feel safe and warm. You tuck them in the bed, then you kiss them goodnight, reassure them that you're right around the corner, you turn the light off, you can walk out of the room. That's sleep hygiene. That's the same thing the cavemen are doing.
What about waking up at the same time or going to sleep at the same time?
That's the test. That's the acid test. That's the test I use with my clients to figure out, are you sleeping well? Because it's really hard to know if you're sleeping well. Like I said, the poor subjective experience of it. And the tracking devices can track the data they're collecting very accurately, but then it's all running that through an algorithm. And the algorithm that's an average for people, right? So if you have a certain device that says, oh, your sleep score is 80 out of 100, but that's the best you've ever felt in the morning, and every time you wake up with that 80, that's the best you feel, well, then that's the best for you, right? So the thing about the sleep tracking is those are good for consistency. So you can, I wouldn't go for accuracy really, right? So if it's like, it's saying, oh, I only got 30%, or not even, so I got 20% deep sleep and I think I need 34% or whatever. Just go for consistency. Like, is this a good day? Like,
well, you base it off yourself. Find your baseline, and then it's I could see that makes a lot of sense, because then you can see your variations based on that, but don't base yourself against the population.
Yeah, you don't base it on the algorithm. And so when you have a sleep tracking device that can help you kind of assess it, but really what you're alluding to is I tell somebody, I get my clients to a point. Unfortunately, most of them have lifestyles that allow this. They don't always, so it's sometimes hard to do. But you need to be able to go to bed around the same time every night without any heroic efforts, right? Like, you should just be able to prepare yourself to go to bed about the same time every night, and then you wake up about the same time every morning, with or without an alarm clock. Ideally, there's no alarm clock, but I always tell people, set an alarm clock, because a lot of times stress is what's keeping you awake. And if you're worried that you're going to oversleep your alarm clock, that's going to keep you awake. And you could say, well, make it super quiet and make it, 15 minutes after you think you're going to wake up, but give yourself a little fudge factor or something. If you can do that, it's just like the bunker trials at that point, right? If I said, hey, this weekend, Saturday night, I want you to go to bed, whatever time, I want your room to be completely darkened out and no sound. So we're not putting sensory into this brain that we're trying to not sensitize, right? And, take some sleep supplements and, do everything perfect. We're going to put you in this room, just sleep as long as you need to. If you sleep 8 hours, your sleep's great, right? If you sleep 12 and a half hours, you're not getting a good enough sleep. And so, if you can build that into your week and do it consistently. So my clients all really get in bed around the same time every night. They wake up the same time every morning, whether they set their alarm or not, within 20, 30 minutes kind of every day. That's the best metric as to whether or not you're getting good sleep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm just curious about my deep sleep. I'm trying to get more based on the app, or sometimes it's wildly different. So I know I don't want to compare myself to the algorithm, but
Right.
sometimes for one night, just said I got 1% deep sleep. I'm like, I felt great. I slept 8.5 hours. So I don't know if the thing sucks or something.
I've used two different devices, and in my personal, my experience clinically, the two most accurate are the Garmin and the Oura Ring, and that's accuracy. That's accuracy of the data collected, not necessarily the algorithm. And I have had, I sleep well. I've been working on this on myself. I've prioritized sleep for the past 10 years, and I take it seriously. I try to have integrity. And of course I don't always do everything right, but I say I'm better than 99% of the population. And I've had nights of 0 deep sleep. I've had nights of 100% deep sleep. Neither one of those are possible, right? So I don't know what to make of those things.
Said that.
Yeah, it said that. The watch or the ring, it said 0% deep sleep. I'm like, I feel pretty good. I find that really hard to believe, or 100% deep sleep. Like, nope, that's not true either. I remember a couple of dreams that only happens in REM. So, they're not perfect. And again, it's the gestalt, and I have clients that aren't techie at all. And I'm like, I don't want a gadget. I don't want to wear a watch. I don't want to, exactly. And I'm like, you know what? You need a notebook and a pen. Write down what time you go to sleep. Write down what time you wake up. Write down anything you remember from your sleep, like if it's good or bad. And then at the end of the day, kind of write down what your performance, how you feel like your performance was. That's all you need. And then you can figure this pattern out, man. You can say, well, it seems like when I go to bed at this time, I'm 35% more likely to have a bad day if I go to sleep after this time, just based on my history. Track myself for a couple of months and figure it out. Again, the data is useless if you don't know how to interpret it. You can collect all the data in the world, but if you're collecting data for you need to know how to interpret that data. You can't rely on other people's algorithms and products because they're basing that off of a population. They're not basing it off of you. Yeah.
It's just a crazy thing we do. Like for our RDAs of nutrients, we just base it on, or our cholesterol or testosterone. It's like, this is the population. I'm like, our population is a mess. Like, why would we do that? All right. We have to cover caffeine if we're talking about sleep.
Okay.
Quick.
So one of the things that I didn't cover, that also helps you go to sleep, but it's not really part of sleep hygiene, because it's by and large, it's not something to be sought to manipulate, because there's no accurate way of predicting it. But as you know, every cell in our body uses a molecule called ATP as its fuel source, right? And it's an adenosine with 3 phosphates on it. The T stands for 3, right? Triphosphate. And then it breaks down to ADP to AMP1. And then once you cleave that other phosphate off, it's just A. It's just adenosine, right? Adenosine builds up in the brain. We're billions of cells put together, but every cell is doing what we're doing, right? Like every cell is taking in nutrients, it's doing work, and it's producing waste, just like we are as a bigger version of all these cells combined. And so the waste product of the energy cycles of cells, the work that's being done, sort of like, burning the fossil fuel, the smoke and the heat, that's the waste product of it, right? So the waste product kind of is adenosine, but adenosine then gets restored to adenosine triphosphate, right? We do the work to put the phosphates back on, and then we have energy for that cell later. But when we can't do that fast enough, we can't restore the adenosine back to ATP fast enough, we have a buildup of adenosine. And what that means is that we're overtaxing our ability to repair. And once we've done it to a certain threshold, our brain says we need to go to sleep, because that's when we repair, right? Our brain's like, this is too much. You got to crash, and you start feeling tired. All caffeine does is it blocks the receptor that adenosine binds to. It doesn't do anything about adenosine though. So you still have plenty of adenosine floating around. So then once the caffeine dislodges, it's not a permanent bond, obviously. Once it dislodges, now adenosine can bind there again. So now how quickly do you metabolize caffeine, right? Some people drink 1 cup of coffee and they're wired for 16 hours, right? Some people drink 1 cup of coffee and an hour later, they don't feel like they had any coffee. It's wildly variable. I think I saw, I might get the number wrong, but it was ridiculous. It was like 30 hours. They found, they find outliers.
The half-life? Or
there was a half-life of 30 hours for some people. And maybe it was one person, but it was just like, there's this huge range. It's like 2 to 30 hours of a half-life. So we can't really predict that well. You can only, again, measure yourself. You can figure it out for yourself. Like, how did I sleep? How did I feel when I went to sleep? What was my heart rate like? If you have jittery or sweats or anything from that, you can use that, whatever your self-assessment of your caffeine use is. But caffeine has a maximum efficacy of somewhere around 200 milligrams. You start going over that, you get this hormetic curve, and you actually start decreasing attention and decreasing focus and coordination and problem solving skills and all the reasons you're taking caffeine. And you actually run into the decrease analgesia, and because caffeine is actually a mild analgesic. It relieves a little bit of pain, and it increases aerobic ability. Very, very small, but it does. And once you start getting pretty far away from that 200 milligrams, all that reverses, and everything hurts more, and your perceived effort goes up, and your performance drops in all areas. So be really careful about that. I was in a hotel lobby, doing this lecture one time. I can't remember what the event was, but I remember the men I was with, and there was 4 of us. We were all lecturing on sleep. We all kind of had different specialty, and that was the most comprehensive lecture I'd ever done. And we're sitting in the lobby of this hotel, waiting to be picked up to go to the event. And happens to be a Starbucks there, and they have one of these placards up on the kind of movie room poles, and there's a little menu, and it has all the calories, and it has the caffeine load. And so Starbucks has, not only do they have coffees that have like 1,200 calories in them, which of course 99.9% of that's just sugar, right? Well, I take the back. They can get a lot of fat in them too. So there's they can get a lot of fat in there, but it's all, it's a ton of fat and sugar they get in these coffees, but some of their large coffees had 600 milligrams of caffeine. So what would happen with that is you start drinking that cup of coffee and you're feeling better and better and better as you're getting up to that 200 milligram mark. And then you're going to keep drinking, and it's going to make you feel worse and worse and worse. And by the time you finish that coffee, you go back to your desk for like an hour. You're like, man, I need another coffee. And it's not going to work because you haven't metabolized what you took. And I think that's maybe a clever way to bring people back in. I don't know if it was intentional, but it sure must work in their favor.
Sounds like the food industry tactics to make you eat more. Oh, wow. Yeah, I guess for me, I mean, I can drink coffee. I've never drinking more than 200 milligrams at once, so I'm not into that. But yeah, I can have it pretty late and still do okay. Yeah, I can fall asleep quickly these days. So I guess just everyone's different.
Yeah, and you probably you probably have a good ratio of adenosine. So when women have insomnia, they tend to not be able to fall asleep. When men have insomnia, they tend to fall asleep for an hour or 2 and then wake up and not be able to fall back to sleep. The reason for that is sleep pressure, because I told you the sleep pressure comes from adenosine. And that's just really your brain's way of saying, we've overdone it, we need to crash. And every cell in our body's producing adenosine, but men have about 30 to 40% more muscle mass on the same size frame as a woman would have. And if you have the same size frame, you have approximately the same size brain, right? If you put a woman who's close to your height with approximately your frame size on there, her brain's going to be the same size as yours. And so you have 30% more muscle mass, you have 30% more adenosine going in your brain. And you can be stressed out of your mind. This is like if you've stayed up for 24 hours or 48 hours, more realistically, you could lay down on hot rocks and cactus and fall asleep for a couple hours. You're just gone. Your brain's just like, we're turning off, man. We've got to go to sleep. And it's a, you're going to go into super deep sleep to try to repair and restore your body and get toxins out of your brain and all that other stuff. And so, yeah, I think, there's a huge difference in sleep pressure. If you're really muscular, lean, and, either man or woman, you're going to produce a lot more adenosine than the average person. And if you're really active, you're going to produce more adenosine. And even if you're way more active cognitively, your neurons in your brain, they're going to produce more adenosine. So you can build up the adenosine and it causes the sleep pressure. And a lot of people are just so chronically sleep deprived that they have a lot of sleep pressure at all times. And so I fall asleep great. It's like, well, if you're falling asleep in 90 seconds after getting in bed, you're sleep deprived.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And also to generalize, now you're talking about the muscle mass and all that stuff and activity level. I feel like the people who say they're so sensitive to caffeine, sometimes they're like these delicate people that are very soft and they aren't the ones with the muscle,
Yeah. Yeah. And you think about it, they just may not have a lot of adenosine to begin with. And so that adenosine sleep pressure is much more mild for them. And then if you block that, their slow metabolizer, I could see that.
Well, everyone's different. I don't want to generalize like that.
Yeah.
But my last thing is, you talked about waking up in the middle of the night. Biphasic sleep. I've read about it in, I forget which book it was, and I've just been interested in it for a while because I would wake up a lot, 4 hours, wake up, be up for an hour, and then go back to sleep for 4 hours, and it was fine because I made my own schedule and it worked for me.
Right.
And then, I thought it was a bad thing. I've heard some people say it's a bad thing. Maybe you could tell me, is it bad? Is it
so? That really, as far as we know, started happening in the agrarian kind of age, and really it's, probably all life, but all human life evolved around the equator, right? And then the further you get from the equator, north or south, doesn't matter, you're getting, your nights are getting longer and shorter during certain seasons, right? And so, when we kind of hit this agrarian age where people were getting up and working in fields all day, and kind of having to use the sun, like obviously, you need the light to work in your field. And you could have really short days and really long nights, not being that far north. I mean, just being as far north as like maybe Virginia or something, through journaling, we know that it was really common for people to sleep, for approximately 4 hours and get up for an hour or two. It's not exclusively, settlers in agrarian settings. Just there is evidence of the same type of thing happening, closer to the equator where people evolved. If the night's long enough, you sleep for 4 hours, you get up for a couple of hours, and you think about it, most of human existence, you've lived in one space with your whole family, right? So if the male and female are going to procreate, that's about their only time is going to be during that, right? But there's legions of stories, especially in Latin cultures, where they'll get up and even like go next door to their neighbors and like, smoke a cigar, play a little cards, whatever, be up for a couple of hours, and they go back and they sleep the rest of the night, but they're still waking up around the time the sun comes up. Within probably 30 minutes of sun up, either way. I think if you're in an environment to where you did a biphasic sleep and you woke up 2 hours after the sun came up, then I think there's probably some circadian shifting and mismatching going on at that point. But if you're still getting up around the time the sun comes up, really no matter what time you go to bed, as long as you're not going to bed when the sun's out, right? So if you're going to bed after the sun goes down and you have time to wake up a little bit and do some stuff and you want to do that, when you go back to sleep and you wake up, there's no body of research to say whether that's ideal or suboptimal. I don't really know, but it's been going on a really long time.
That's kind of my take on it. I think one of the books that mentioned it was Sex at Dawn, and talked about Yeah, like it was like a social hour type of thing, and people would,
Yeah, I think Lights Out mentions that as well. That was one of the first sleep books I read, and then William Dement's book, A Promise of Sleep, definitely mentions that too. So, I mean, it's been around for a while. We know that it's a significant part of our history. There's no journaling and stuff back 10,000 years. So was it happening 10,000 years ago? Who knows? But, but as far as I know, there's no, I mean, I couldn't even possibly imagine a detriment to that, honestly, because as I was saying, like the first half of the night is primarily deep sleep, and you're kind of, halfway through the night, you're kind of shifting now your priority. Like that's right when REM sleep is about to become dominant. And in order to get to REM sleep, you really have to go through the brainwave states of being awake, because you're going from deep sleep past being awake, because REM state's a higher brainwave frequency. So you're going past that to get into REM. And if you're really well recovered and, from that first part, and you've had your big anabolic pushes and you've pushed out all of your toxins and everything that's causing sleep pressure, and you come through a period of wakefulness and you wake up, and it's, something you're kind of used to doing, and you get up for an hour or two, but then you go right back down, and, your sleep cycles continue as though you've never missed a beat. I don't really see that would be problematic, but I haven't seen any research on trying to compare that performance. It'd be hard to do. You'd have to find people who could do that, who could turn that on and off. And I don't think that doesn't seem to be that way. It kind of seems like there's people that do that and there's people that don't.
Yeah. Well, as long as it's not making you get too little sleep.
Right. As long as you're getting 8 hours of sleep.
Yeah. So some people just have time to do it. And then I think what would happen is if your alarm was set and you didn't have time to do it, you'd be tired, and then you wouldn't wake up later because you're tired. Right. The next day you'd catch up on your sleep debt, and you probably wouldn't spend 2 hours sitting awake. Right. So I think it takes care of itself.
Yeah. Most of human evolution, people didn't have alarm clocks. The sun was the closest thing, or the rooster maybe was the closest thing.
Yeah. I designed my life to not have an alarm clock.
Yeah.
It's one of my goals in life.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I rarely need an alarm clock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, we didn't get to any other topics like the whole. Well, we don't need to talk about all this. I'm interested in the herd immunity stuff and COVID stuff, and all. There's so much to say about that. Yeah, but maybe there will be a round 2 at some point.
We can always do another one, man. We live in the same city.
Yeah, it's great to be in Austin, man. This is the place to be.
All the cool kids are moving to Austin.
I know, we can't tell too many people, or it's gonna just get overrun. I feel bad already. I'm on like the tail end of this.
Yeah. But I think you feel like you're on the tail end of it. I don't think we've seen the rush. I don't even think we've seen the rush yet. Even.
Well, I've been visiting for 6 years, so it's not like I just randomly popped over here.
Right.
But great stuff, man.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thanks for everything. Where do people find you in your sleep supplement?
Just Doc, DOC, short for doctor, obviously. Parsley is my last name, like the herb, Parsley. It's at docparsley.com.
Awesome.
I have if you know that stress is a problem for you, I have a downloadable PDF. It's probably the most effective tool I use with my clients to help them control their stress around sleeping. If you go docparsley.com/stress, it'll take you to that. And you can find this supplement on docparsley.com as well. Just go into the shop or store or whatever the word is. I don't know.
It's great.
It's pretty intuitive.
Good stuff.
Cool, man. Thanks for having me on.
Take care.
Yeah.
That's it for this week. Thanks so much. Thanks for sharing with a friend. Thanks for giving it a review on iTunes or the podcast app. It does help us, and it's free. Also, nosetotail.org for all the great meat, the biltong. We got some of the body care back in stock. We got the seasonings, even the steak hats. I wear my nose to tail hat proudly every weekend while I play beach volleyball. Sapien.org for the program or to join the tribe, get the special access and extended show notes and the other perks. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.